There's a part of me the world may never know. Here's my story. When I lose, I let my guard down. Here's the naked truth. I let my guard down. Here's the naked truth. I let my guard down. I let my guard down. I let my guard down. Here's the naked truth.
My people, this is your boy Monroe, aka He Smiles, your host of the Naked Truth Experience. And I want to welcome you back to another week of December. That means it's another week of throwbacks, y'all, for the Naked Truth Experience episodes. And I'm so excited that you are here with us. We are winding down 2020. And yes, 2020 has been a roller coaster. It has been a ride, but we are here. We are here, y'all. Did you hear me? And so let's continue to look back and let's continue to pay homage of everything that we've come through. And I'm doing that with where we started with the Naked Truth Experience. So this week, I'm bringing you another gem. But before we get to that, and I introduce who we're going to be talking to again tonight, I want to remind you to please like, share, and subscribe. It is so important that you continue to help us spread the message of the Naked Truth Experience, and we can do that with your support in those ways. And then make sure you please join our Facebook group, the Naked Truth Experience group here on Facebook. And I want you to get in there, start sharing your thoughts, and I'd love to hear from you what your response is to the episodes that we've created so far and what you'd like to see coming up in 2021. As I've stated, we are going into the vault and we are pulling out some gems. I love all of my episodes, but as I started to rewatch some of them, some of these like really stuck out, and some conversations that I had that were extremely raw, real, uncut, transformative, healing, and really got to the heart and the core of a lot of things that we all deal with. And one of those things is emancipating ourselves from expectations, emancipating ourselves from ideology and things that impact us on a daily basis, especially when it comes to muting certain parts of our identity. And so this week I have a conversation with Mr. Nicholas Gaines. He's an educator, he's a father, he's an activist, he's a chaplain, and he is just an all-around amazing man who is raising two young kings. And this conversation that I'm having with him, and he also identifies as queer, this conversation that I'm having with him really gets to the core of what it means to be Black, what it means to be a Black man, what it means to be a Black queer man in this society, and how we have to emancipate ourselves from the expectations of others, and how it is liberating and freeing. So I want you to tune into this conversation, because I promise you, it is one that you do not want to miss. Let's hear the conversation between me and Nick. As you may know, tomorrow is Juneteenth, the celebration, right? And for many, that is our Black Independence Day, our Black freedom. Now, let me tell you something. As I was reading a lot about the Juneteenth, there was something that struck me. And something that struck me was that a lot of us, have been told that the story is centered around a white general riding into Texas and letting the slaves know that they had been freed. And this was like 2.5 years after the proclamation had went forward, right? Now, my problem with that story is that it centered it around this white general basically giving us free, as Amistad would say, you know what I'm saying? And it erased the opportunity for us to take ownership of our own freedom narrative. And so tonight we have an amazing guy. His name is Nicholas Gaines, right? Psychotherapist, pastoral psychotherapist, and educator, activist. This man right here is someone who I've been following for a long time. So I'm happy to have him on the show tonight. And so I think he is popped in here, and we're just going to go ahead and get it started, because we're going to hear from him about his emancipation narrative, y'all. So we're going to bring on this Gaines. Come on in the house. Nick, where you at, man? I'm excited to bring you on, man. Here we go.
Hey.
Well, what's going on, sir? How you doing?
I'm good. How are you? I'm great, man. Now wait a minute. We got something in common over here. What's going on? I'm seeing the blonde tips and I'm seeing the
Yeah,
locks rocking. I love it, brother.
yeah. I reattached I had locks and cut them off about 3 years ago, and I decided to reattach them this summer. So they're back.
Man, it looks
Yeah,
good, man. How you feeling? How you doing, black man?
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm glad that tomorrow is Friday. It's
yeah,
Juneteenth, which is great, and I'm
yes.
looking forward to the weekend, especially Father's Day weekend, because I'm a dad.
Yes.
So yeah,
Happy Father's Day, early happy Father's Day to you. You know, you
thank
have
you.
two beautiful kings, man. And I really, really,
Thank
I
you.
want to say this now. We're going to get into conversation, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about it. But as an aspiring father, you know, one day I hope to be a father myself.
Yeah,
Man, it's so amazing to be able to look at you and the way in which you are bringing up your young kings to be some very
thank you. Thank you.
caring,
Thank
right?
you.
Nurturing young
Thank
men
you.
as well as strong, right?
Thank you.
Knowledgeable, critical thinkers. Like I
Yes.
watch, brother. I
Thank
watch
you.
and I love
Thank
it.
you.
So
Thank you.
now, Nicholas, you know, I always usually ask folks. Now, first of all, my audience always keeps me honest because they're like, this is the naked truth, Monroe,
Okay.
and you're not always asking people what's their naked truth when they first come on. So I'm
Okay.
gonna refrain for a moment because we're gonna dig in and we're gonna get a few naked truths. So I'm not even gonna worry about that.
Okay.
But what I want you to do, sir, is just let us know a little bit about yourself. Who are you, Nicholas? And can I call you Nick? Is that okay?
You can call me Nick. Yes. Thank you
Okay.
for
All
asking.
right, Nick. All right. No, you know how it
I
is. We get them names Ray
listen.
Ray, and we're like, I didn't give you permission.
Right, right. Professionally, if we was in a different environment, it'd be Nicholas, but no, we're good. We fam here. What about me? So I am a dad. I think
Yes.
it's one of my most important titles. I'm a dad. I am a school administrator. So I work in public schools. I'm an educator. I'm a veteran. Spent 10 years, 7 years in uniform, 3 years out of uniform, working for the Department of Defense as a chaplain, military officer. And then I went on to run a division of behavioral health for the Department of Defense, specifically suicide prevention and sexual assault.
Wow.
I spent some time, obviously, like I said, as a chaplain, spent some time as a family pastor. In that time that I was in the military, I had some active duty time and some reserve time. So while I was a reservist, I was pastoring and I was working, directing boys and girls clubs, doing a lot of nonprofit type work. So my life has been, when I think about it, I've been doing activism work
Yeah.
since high school, since my freshman year of high school.
Wow.
And it's been something that's been near and dear to me because I think it's always been about how do we lift up and amplify all
Yeah.
of our voices. And
Yeah.
so that's been my life's work literally since I was 14.
And brother, you've worn a lot of titles, like you've
Yeah.
served in a lot of different capacities, and so these intersections of, I'm sure, your identity and these different
hmm
titles and positions, I'm eager to dive in. Are you from the South? Because you're in Texas right now,
I
right?
do. I live in Texas. No, I'm not from the South. I actually grew up in Minneapolis,
Wow,
where
wow,
all of the protests and things like that originated lately. So yeah, I grew up in Minneapolis. I'm the son of my dad. My stepdad worked for an airline. He fixed planes, and then my mom, she was a pastor,
wow.
and
Okay.
she also worked in the medical field as well, but she was a pastor. And so I think a lot of my speaking, especially, was because I was at church like 6 days a week, and
Yeah,
I was just
yeah,
always on the pew with with my mom specifically.
yeah,
And so in terms of prayer, in terms of, I remember people would always call her to kind of talk about their problems. And
yeah.
she was always on the phone listening to people. And in a lot of ways that really shaped who I became today. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
talk about that young activist. You talked about that at like 14. Like, where did
Yeah.
that come from? And what who were you reading? Who were you seeing like that really inspired and shaped this young activist at 14 and beyond?
I can't say honestly that I was reading anybody at 14 that made me be like, oh, I want to be an activist. I think it was more, so from third grade forward, I was in a white suburb. And so we
Okay.
moved basically from the hood to the suburbs. And so in that process, there was this moment of continually seeing myself, my personhood not centered in my classroom. So when it came time to read books and things like that, I was never, my humanity as a young black man wasn't centered. It was interesting being in my different classes because I was generally the only Black person in like AP advanced classes. And so all my teachers were white, my peers were white. And so I think I just started to get really angry at the fact that we were living in two different worlds, right? So, you know, there's the world that the white kids would talk about, like my car, my, you know, the football game or whatever. And then there was this reality that Black people live in. And I think that that duality is something that's still present today, right? So you have, you know, white folks talking about brunch and kale chips and things like that.
Come on now.
And then we out here like, yeah, we, you know, I'm vegan, so like I eat kale chips too, but we live in this world in which I have an anxiety when police are behind me when I'm driving, or, you know that even if I walk into the bank qualified to buy a home and get a loan, that it might not be the same process for me. So growing up, I think really, you know, like we lived in the burbs, but we used to drive 50 minutes to go to our Black church. And so there was like a whole world that we drove through just to get to be with our people. And so I think in a lot of ways, I just was angry all the time. And I never felt like my voice was heard. And I also felt like in a lot of ways, especially through middle school, I was bullied a lot. And I don't think I had the confidence, and I definitely did not have the agency to be able to speak up for myself. And so I think a lot of the activism and the anger and the like, this isn't right, I need you to hear me and see me, was because I spent so many years not feeling that way.
Do you think that there was an intentional effort by your parents to make sure that you remained connected to the community? You talk about driving X amount of miles to get to the Black church. You live in the suburbs, but like understanding who you were as a Black person, like, was that something that was intentional in your household? Was that around the dinner table, like talking about these different things, about the duality that existed? Or was this something that you just felt? Like, how did they play a role in that?
I think that's a great question. You know, I think I will say this, in some ways, as my adult self, right? After school and training and therapy, I see some of the ways that my house was anti-Black, right? And I say that, and I want to be clear in saying that I don't think it was like my parents woke up and they were like, we're going to be anti-Black today. I think that for their generation, that proximity to whiteness equaled success. And so I think the idea of moving out of the hood, moving to the burbs, getting a nicer car, not living in the house, because, you know, we was dodging bullets for a minute. And so I think for them, it was that we're now out of the hood and we have this bit of success. And so my mom specifically was very certain about, this is how you will dress, this is how you will talk, this is how you behave, this is how you will be. And again, I don't think anything that she said was wrong, but I do think that some of that exceptionalism gave me this feeling of that I was better than the Black folks who maybe couldn't read, or the Black folks who were loud, or the Black folks who just had different priorities. And I think it took me literally until my 30s before I started to really deconstruct some of that anti-Blackness in myself, because I grew up with it, you know. And again, I don't think that they set out to be like, you will be anti-Black, but I just think that for them, it was like, we have to be successful, and success is being equal to or having the same things that white folks have.
So, man, okay, so you know this is what I'm talking about. This is why I knew, y'all, I was ready for this conversation, because I knew Nick was going to bring it. But Nick, there was a lot of things that in there jumped up in my spirit, right? The respectability piece, right? Because I was having this conversation the other day about, like, you know, our mothers, our grandparents' generation, right? It was this piece that you need to be twice as good as the white folks. And so there was this piece on, like, you know, folks was clean back in the day, right? You don't step outside not looking your best, right? And there was this piece on, I was having a conversation around stigma in the Black community around mental health, and like how, you know, this is, you know, there's almost no room for us to be vulnerable, for us to appear weak, because again, this is an opportunity for white folks to penetrate that vulnerability, and you had to be best. And this is how our parents and their parents were bred. And so the tension in that is that, I think, as you pointed out, there are some great qualities in as far as aspects of, like, I grew up with pride, you know, take pride in yourself, right? But then there is this piece that when I became an adult and I started making X amount of dollars, when it was time for me to buy a house, I didn't buy a house in the neighborhood that I grew up in. And I bought a house in the neighborhood that I had aspired to always be in when I was growing up, right? And so there was this tension about, like, if I am successful, and I'll put successful in quotes because we can talk a little bit about what are our metrics of success, and
Right.
like where does
Yes.
that
Yep.
standard come from, and we know
Yep.
what that is,
Of
right?
course.
But this piece on like I work hard and I want to have certain things. Why can't I have those in the neighborhood in which I grew up in?
Of
And
course.
am I wrong for wanting to maybe be in my city? It was called Greenhaven. It
Okay.
even sounds like a
It
utopian
does.
place of, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And where I grew up was called G Parkway. So you
Okay.
got G Parkway and Greenhaven,
Right.
right? Just in the moniker, you're like,
I think I'm a little over there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that. Have you felt that tension even in your adulthood, as far as like,
Oh
man, I want a
yeah.
better life, and or
I think, it was interesting because I think as I was growing up and graduating from undergrad, before I went to grad school, I remember my mom telling me, I went to a really conservative evangelical seminary, and I emailed my mom my admissions essay, and I was really proud of it. And in part, I'm talking about destroying systems, like all the things, right? But one of the things in there that I said was that, like, I'm the first man in my family to go to college. And I talked about how that made me feel, that like I get to tell my sons that like I did this thing that no one else has done. And so my mom was like, well, that's great, but like the men in this family also work hard, and they
yeah,
also have, they care about their families, and they hustle to make it work. And so
yeah,
I don't, at the time, my 21-year-old self didn't get, I think, what she was saying, in that, our worthiness, we're worthy because we're here. There's no prerequisite for our
come on,
worthiness. There's no thing that we have to do. So if I have three, terminal degrees, and I own a house and I have a perfect credit score, I'm just as worthy as the person who is on Section 8, right?
yeah,
And who's using their SNAP card to get their food, right? Like, I'm just as worthy in the eye of the Creator, and just as worthy in this world because of that. And so I think for me, it took a long time to really deconstruct that no matter what accomplishment I made, no matter who I worked for, no matter what title I had, that I didn't have to have any of that to be worthy. And I think that for me was really the driving force behind, like, when I go on interviews and people look at my CV, they're like, how did you do all these things? And I think a lot of my career was really based off of proving my worthiness, so that when I walked in the room, that I felt like I was the smartest, that I was the most qualified, but I wasn't whole and I wasn't happy. And so
wow,
I think a lot of times in our trying to align with whiteness, the
yeah,
construct of whiteness and success, we lose ourselves. We can easily
yeah,
lose ourselves thinking that we have to really, because every time we take something from whiteness, we pull something from ourselves.
come on, yeah,
And I when I say we, I'm talking about people of color, Black
yeah,
folks.
black folk,
And
yeah,
it took me a lot of therapy and a lot of work to really be like, oh wait, those things that I turned down, those things I put in the dimmer, really made me more of who I am. That gave me the seasoning on top of this stuff, so I can go and do this job. You know what I mean?
Let me ask you a little bit about your interaction with, as you were deconstructing this, and even prior to deconstructing this, your interaction with other Black people that, again, we had thought we were maybe a little bit different
Better.
from, or
Yeah.
I'm not that Black. What was that
hmm
interaction like for you? And how did that play out?
I don't think that, and because this is the naked truth, right? So,
Yes, it is, sir. They ready
okay.
for it.
All right. So when I think about going through high school, college, undergrad, I don't think that I worked to develop meaningful relationships with Black people,
Mm.
because in my mind, I adapted the same mentality that my parents had, which is this proximity to whiteness. So when I look at my high school yearbook, when I look at college photos, I am always the only Black person in the photo. And I'm
Mm.
smiling and I'm happy. And I think that some of us really derive power from being the only Black person in the room. Like, that literally becomes our narrative. Like, oh, well, I'm the first Black, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is that our success is centered, it's not centering us, it's centering the whiteness around us that makes us feel like we're successful.
Wow.
Right? So when you ask that question, I don't think I had meaningful relationships. I didn't work to build them until I was in grad school. I had one really good friend, which her and I are still good friends, that I feel like I had like a meaningful relationship with, but the rest of my relationships were with white people, or when they were with Black people, as they were with my family, they were very transactional, like the barbershop, the place you go get your chicken, but they weren't relationships. And so
Wow.
in a lot of ways, I felt like I was better, you know?
I pause there just because, again, if we're taking a very like honest look at ourselves, I know, you know, I live here in the New York City area, and there's been many times when I've been on public transportation, or even when I lived back in California, you're in public transportation, and you see that brother, you see that sister that may come on and get loud and
Yes.
get crazy and get to cursing or get to, you know, acting a fool, right? And, you know, again, in my naked truth, I'm just like, yo, like I felt there was even this, I had to overcompensate for the actions of my brother, of my sister, right? On this. And I hated that feeling that I felt that way. First of all, that I saw somebody else that looked just like me, and that I hated the fact that I felt in some kind of way like I was better than, because I was not acting in that way. And then what it caused me to do, and we've talked about on this show, performance and mask, it caused me to, yes, still be genuine Monroe, but then be extra eloquent, be extra polite when I spoke to someone, or, oh, excuse me, because again, there was this overcompensation for like what I felt like I was trying to counteract this other narrative that other people were seeing. And I think the work that I had to do, and it's, you know, it's not far away type of work, but it's ongoing. When I had to realize like, yo, that is me, and I am him. And it was this piece on like growing up in G Parkway, understanding that like there were certain privileges that I recognized that existed within my life, within home and support, in my mother and extended family and different things that allowed me to have certain access to certain things that my brother next door, who did not have that access or those certain privileges, is no different than me, but as a result of certain conditions, right? And that we know are systemic, and because those conditions only allow for exceptions and not the norms. So I'm sitting in my NYU graduate classes being the only Black man. But I had to say, like, no, don't look at me like you're like, oh, you one of the good ones. Like, I reject that narrative. And it really was a lot of work for me to sit there. And so now when I see my brother and sister, now I'm not saying I condone, you know, ignorance if there's, you know, in anybody, right? But it is this place of like being honest about my judgment. And that's a hard thing to look at, especially when you consider yourself to be conscious. You consider yourself to, you know, be this lover of your people, like
And I think that one of the things that I had to do was realize that because someone else's behavior isn't necessarily a reflection of me, right? But even more so, it's the deeper part, right? Like the conscious part of doing the work of saying, like, that sister is cussing out this man at this store for not giving her correct change because she's in pain. And that pain is coming from somewhere, and that pain is tied to an experience. That pain is tied maybe to a trauma that I have no idea about. That pain is tied to the fact that in other places and in other spots in her life, she's not being heard. And so right now, in this moment, in the store, she's going to let this man have a piece of her mind because this is the only place where she gets to do that. You know what I mean? And so for me, it was about recognizing that, like, yo, we obviously, as we know, like, Black people are not monolithic, but all of us are intimately acquainted with oppression, right, in different forms. And I think our role as Black folks is in whatever privilege we have, right? So me being a Black queer man, I need to think like, what are the ways that I can use my privileges for the uplift and equity of all people? And so when I look at, you know, when I would go to Walmart and the sister's cussing out the customer service person, it's like, where is that coming from for her? And to let her have that moment, and to recognize that actually I don't have to give her permission to do anything because she's who she is.
Absolutely.
You know? And I think once I started to realize that, I stopped thinking about myself as better and saw myself as like, yo, we on the same race.
Absolutely.
We on the same race. And the only difference maybe is, like you said, there's maybe the access to opportunity, but it's like, yo, what do I do with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not about, like, for me, it's not about walking in the room and being like, I'm the first, I'm the only, I have this degree. It's literally like, yo, I'm in the room now. I'm at the table. How do I amplify what's up with my community at this table? How do I turn around and reach back and pull up those who are equally worthy and equally valuable to me so that their story and narrative is told?
Yeah. So you slipped in there another aspect of your identity that we both share, and you know, I love to keep it real because, you know, Nick and I were talking on the phone in the pre-interview, and he was like, "Yo, so are you out, brother? Are you out? Because just in case I say, you know, us in the community," I said, "Man, it's the naked truth. They know, you know, brother's gay, you know."
Yeah.
But I appreciated, you know, you asking me that question, but you know, thinking about, you know, that aspect of your identity. I mean, man, you're in the military, you are clergy, right? You are a father, right? You are a Black man, you're an administrator in education.
Right.
How has that aspect of your identity, being identifying as a queer man, how has that played into those different roles, and what has that done as far as how you show up in the world, in these different aspects? Has it, you know?
Yeah, no, I hear your question. I will say this, that it's the person I am today has not always been the person that I am. And I say that because I think that a lot of who I was as I grew up, the queer parts of me, right? Like, I think when we're born, we intrinsically know who we are. We intrinsically know who we are. And I think because of our environments, because of the worlds that we live in, our families' ideas of who we should be, their projections of their trauma on us to be something, that's what molds us. And so I think we take those things and we become who we are. And so I think a lot of my work, I think one of the reasons I think I'm great at the work that I do is because I've lived through a lot of trauma and I've had to do a lot of deconstructing. And so when you ask the question now, how do I show up as a queer man? That wasn't always something I was even comfortable saying out loud.
Yeah.
That wasn't something that I was even, because, you know, I was taught that these parts of me, right, that had the same gender attraction, were evil and nasty, and that I needed deliverance, and that I needed God to fix me. And to think that I felt like I needed to partition this part of me off to be who people around me, the environment around me wanted to be, is crazy, because it's like that part of me is what makes me compassionate, and that part of me makes me loving and sensitive, right, and nurturing. So I'm still doing the work, I think, as a school administrator at a school of 3,000 kids, largely Black and Hispanic, as an activist in my work, you know, talking around equity. Like, I'm still standing in my truth and learning to center myself without feeling like I have to partition any part of me, because you get the whole of me, you know, but that takes work. And I think that work is something that, when we talk about emancipation, I feel like that work is worth doing, because you might lose, you know, I call it coming home to myself.
Okay.
And coming home to myself, so that's really sitting with who I am. I lost a lot, right? Like, I lost a lot of, like, friendships. I lost a lot of, there was work, career stuff that I lost, money, relationships, but I found myself.
Wow.
And so when you say, how do you show up? I now show up in the world as someone who is very aware of who he is. I'm also aware of the narrative that I have, and I'm also aware of the power that I have.
Yeah.
And so all that to say, you know, I think a lot of us, especially as adults, because we've lived through, especially folks of color, people of color, especially queer folks, we've lived through a lot of trauma. We've swallowed a lot of injustice. We've swallowed a lot of inequality. And I think in some ways that swallowing makes us silent. And so as we start to do that work to deconstruct and figure out who we are, we're chipping away at all those things to come back to who we really were to begin with.
Yeah. No, I can definitely, it resonates with me. And when you're talking about that journey and how difficult that is, but the things that you lose pale in comparison to what you gain, when you find truly who you are and you are able to walk in that authenticity. So you mentioned the word emancipation, and that's actually, right, it's the Emancipation Edition. Before we dive into kind of like that narrative, and I know we've already started chipping away at that, but what does emancipation mean to you? Like, what does that even, you know, trigger in you, and what does that bring up for you, emancipation?
I really think it's about the letting go of systems, of belief systems, of theologies, of paradigms, ways of thinking, of doctrines, of projections that are not who we intrinsically know ourselves to be.
Mm.
It's the systemic inequality that produces prejudices. It's the way we grow up. Maybe, you know, I remember when I look at my pictures as a kid, I look at the ways I always am very sensitive to like body language and how I'm sitting, and if are my legs crossed, am I posing, am I postured, and all those moments when my masculinity was policed, right?
Wow.
And then because of the policing of it, I started to perform masculinity. I started to act in ways that I thought, well, I'm not going to get my ass beat if I do this, or I'm not going to get beat up if I do this. And so it was the telling myself that if I sit in this chair with my legs crossed, that's okay.
Yeah.
That I'm not any less worthy, I'm no less enough, I'm no less myself because I sit in this way, you know? And it seems really simple, but I think emancipation is always the deconstructing, the tearing down of these ideals that we've been told that we had to be in favor of who our spirit tells us that we are.
I love that. Who our spirit tells us who we are, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because I do believe, and I think in the work that I've done personally and the work that I partner with individuals to do in the life coaching, I often just ask us to let's go back. Let's regress to the childhood and to the place in which where I had a wonderful guest on. His name is Michael Kilgore, and he said something that at age 30, whatever he is, he still has the ignorance of disbelief. That when a kid says, you know, when an adult says, hey, what do you want to be? And the kid says, I want to be a dinosaur. He says at 30 something, he still has that ignorance of disbelief. And so I like to take us back to that time when the things of this society and the constructs and the messages that we receive that limit our imagination and that limit our creativity. Like, how do we tap back into that? So talk to me a little bit about that actual work that you had to do. Like, what was that? Where did we start?
So I remember there was someone I followed on Facebook. I followed lots of people on Facebook. There was a particular person I followed on Facebook who I really admired. Spiritually, I really admired this person. And his name is Zachary Brown. And he is he's a mystic, he's a life coach. But I followed his work a lot on social media. And he and I, started talking and we started sharing story. If you kind of Google this man, he used to sing for like Hillsongs and Israel and New Breed, won Grammys. I mean, this dude has had a whole career himself, a whole life. Yeah. And he, in coming out of that life of singing and Grammys and all those things, he had a whole like drug addiction, all these crazy things. And then after a couple of years came out of that to like really walk away from the church and the teachings of evangelical Christianity. And I think what was interesting in talking to him was that our stories were similar in some ways, that like we had really done the performance. And then it was like, I don't know who I am. And so in a lot of ways, he was a great conduit to he would never tell me what to do. He would always just ask me questions and walk away. Yeah. And I would just be sitting there like, wow. After about a year and a half or maybe even 2 years of kind of him and I talking and him sending me stuff to read and stuff. And of course started expanding, what I knew. Cause I was, I went to seminary. So my reading was very white evangelical, very not womanist, very not queer centered. I was in the military. I was away at a training and I was in the mirror shaving and I was in my uniform. I had about 5 minutes to get to my car to get to class. And I remember looking at myself as I was shaving my face and I was like, this is not who I am.
Wow.
Like, this is not me. I will never forget that because I actually Facebooked it when I got to class. I like saved that Facebook because I looked in the mirror today and said, this is not who I am. And from that particular day, I believe it was like March 15th, maybe 6 years ago, I really started to aggressively walk away from everything that was not germane to who I am.
Wow.
So what I mean by that is I started to really interrogate my friendships. I started to interrogate the things I was reading. I started to interrogate the people that I thought were advisors. I started to look at my relationships with people, both my platonic, my romantic relationship. I started looking at my belief system. I started to look at my interactions with people, and I I think I walked away from that really having a different understanding of myself as a Black person, as a person who is spiritual, but I didn't identify any longer as a Christian. And what does it mean for me to be a queer man? To like really not be like, oh, this is that thing I did, you know, back in college, whatever, whatever. But it's like, oh no, this is this thing that is a thing now. And that took years. That took a couple years. That took a lot of therapy. That took a lot of reading stuff that made me feel uncomfortable. That took a lot of uncomfortable conversations. That took a lot of silence, a lot of contemplation. And then as I started to strip these things away, I started to feel more free. And the first year, I think it was probably the scariest year of my life, because I was growing up as a pastor's kid, I was very attuned to, I know how to act perfect because everyone's watching me. And so
those PKs, we know.
I know. And so I was very careful about, like, I read all these articles every day on social media, but I wouldn't post the ones that were real out there because they would think something. If I start posting articles about, you know, treating queer people like they're actual people, they're going to think something about me. Or if I start, you know, and so it took years to really do all this undoing. A lot of tears and a lot of hard conversations with people that I loved, where it got to a point where it was like, this is this person that I've discovered, and I want you to walk in all the truth with me. And if you cannot come in my life and support and affirm this truth around my faith, around my race, right? Like, what does it really mean to live, embody Blackness? What does it mean to live as a queer man? What does it mean to maybe not even have a whole career in ministry and do what I actually want to do, not what someone told me I needed to do? Like, if you can't walk with me and love me through that, then like, why are we here? And so it took years of undoing and unshackling. And so when we talk about emancipation, it's really like, my emancipation for me was the best self-care that I could have given myself.
Wow. You have somebody in the comments saying that they feel like you are telling their life story. And I think it is so important to recognize that the similarities in a lot of our narratives around this life, this performance that we live, and that it actually burdens and pains my heart when I think of individuals who have lived 50, 60 years and who are yet still not able to walk in their truth.
Mm-hmm.
And you are now raising two kings, right? These two
Mm-hmm.
young men
Yeah.
that are these beautiful examples of the best of humanity from, you know, what I can see. And I'm proud of them from a distance. I'm like
Thank
proud
you.
uncle over here that they don't know anything about.
The uncles, the uncles and aunties.
Right.
Yeah.
But talk to me a little bit about this work that you've had to put in, this investment into being who you are, these tears that you've cried and all this other kind of stuff. Like, what does that look like as far as how you now parent these young kings coming up? And because I'm sure as a parent, you want to, as much as possible, probably your natural inclination is to help them avoid pitfalls and potholes that you may have stumbled on. But then how do you respect their process of discovery and their journey? What does that balance look like for you as a parent, especially to two young Black men?
Yeah. You know, we don't even have time for this narrative, but, you know, I grew up not knowing my dad, right? So I met my biological dad when I was 27 years old. Had a whole life, whole career, grad school, married, kids, all the things. And we just met like, hey, you know. And so for me, fatherhood has been about giving my sons what I didn't have and what they need. And so it's the duality of those two things. And I think that parenting Black boys, especially now in this current social political climate, is about affirming the fullness of who they are. I don't want to stand in the way of them being themselves in no way. I don't want my kids to be in years of therapy because of how we parented them. You know what I mean? And so for me, it's like, yo, if you want to paint pictures and sing something, like, do it. I always want to be affirming of like, this is what you see for yourself and I see it. I think the biggest thing that I'm very cognizant of, and I'm very cognizant of the people around us, is that I don't want them feeling like they have to perform a certain way to be
Yeah.
loved.
Wow.
You don't have to perform. You don't have to perform masculinity. You don't have to perform, you don't have to do that. I'm very cognizant of the policing of them, in terms of how they act, in terms of how they sit, in terms, all the ways that we police masculinity, all the ways that, I remember going to a family reunion, and my son at the time, I think was like 7, and it was like, you got any little girlfriends? And it was like, we're not doing this. He's 7. We're not about to sexualize a child. We're also not about to make him feel this pressure to identify that he has to enjoy talking to a girl. He's not interested. But also, if he thought a boy was cool, that's also something that we're going to be okay with too. You know what I mean? So it's really like being very careful around making sure that they don't feel like they have to perform, that the masculinity isn't policed, and that their idea of what masculinity is, right? The construction of masculinity is built on like emotional intelligence, right? That it's built on centering the marginalized. So right now, this place that we're in terms of protest, it's really about like, yo, people are pissed off, they're hurt, and they have a right to speak. So how does that make you feel when you don't get to hear, when people don't listen to you? How does it feel when, and so it's really trying to like create like a sense of empathy and awareness and connection to people, and specifically Blackness. Because as beautiful as my sons are, they're a lot lighter than me, but as beautiful as they are, it's very easy for people to really fetishize how like light and cute they are. But we know as Black men that runs away, and suddenly they go from like 10-year-old boy to man. And so it's also about like teaching them like resilience and like survival, while still affirming like their beauty and their intelligence and their power. It's a lot,
I know people are tired of me and getting emotional on this show, but I'm literally welling up inside because of the statement that you started that segment with, and that response with, when saying you want to teach your boys that they don't have to perform to be loved.
No.
And I have talked about this on previous shows, and like, the weight of performance,
Mm-hmm.
the weight of a cognizance of every single move that you make,
Mm-hmm.
and the weight of feeling like if you skip a beat, if you miss a note,
Mm-hmm.
if you forget a line,
Mm-hmm.
you might be canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And the pressure that puts on adults, but children, we're talking about young people who early on have to then contend with this type of pressure of performance.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess I'm just thinking about how you approach this. You do not have to perform to be loved, and how profound that is,
Mm-hmm.
and how radical love, of an expression of love that is, so that your young kings know, man, like, I can just be me anytime, anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
anyhow, regardless, and I am loved.
I think that what's really important as parents, whether you're Black or white or whoever, is the idea that home has to be, and I feel strongly about this. The world is crazy, right? There is so much chaos in the world. They encounter, the gas station attendant, police officers, teachers, principals, who are carrying their trauma and very much projecting it onto them. And there's ways of being, right, that are very socially acceptable. There's not, Black children don't get the luxury to dance around when they're eating. They don't get the luxury to be loud. They don't get the luxury to like mess up without that being or meaning something, right? And so for me, in my house, my home has to be sanctuary. Home has to be safe. It has to be the place where you feel like you can come and rest and have peace and recharge. And so the one thing that I can't be, right, that I don't want to have, and this is, so help me God, is I don't want to be an oppressive force in my kids' lives. I want home to be a place of liberation. Home has to be a place where there is an abundance of love. that there's an abundance of being filled from the inside out. And so when you go outside, when you go into the world, when you go into the classroom, when people tell you a narrative that is not aligned to who we're raising you to be, you get to then say, that's not who my daddy said I am. That's not who we are, right? So for me, every day for the last 3 years, we lived in Texas for 3 years, every day that my sons are home, I do affirmations with them every day. And that affirmation is that I am smart, I'm strong, I'm brave, I'm handsome, I'm enough, and I'm worthy, and I'm powerful. I tell them, my sons, that every day. And intentionally I tell them that because they're going to go into the world and there's going to be like, you're not this, you're not that. And they need to know that their daddy told them, right? That the person that shares their last name, that they get their identity from, we have the same looks, the same mannerisms, the same blood, that this is how I feel about you. And I want them to know, no matter what happens, no matter what they're told, no matter what narrative society gives, that CNN gives, that I am smart, I am intelligent, I'm handsome, I'm strong, I'm powerful, I'm worthy, and I'm enough. And I think that if I, as a child, would have known that, I think of all the work that I could have avoided internally, not trying to prove myself to other people that I was those things. And so my house has to be an incubator where they are able to learn that and live that. Has to be. It has to be. And that, to me, I think is probably my most important job as a dad raising 2 Black boys.
I think those affirmations definitely apply to us adults too. Some of us need to say that because we live in this world that we go out into every day, and unfortunately some of us did not have the luxury of having this type of early on affirmation in the home, that sanctuary and that safe haven. And so again, man, just thank you for the example that you are setting in your home. I'm not even going to say to America, right? Because I know when we think about what's most important is, I'm sure it's when you look into those eyes of those 2 young men that you are raising. And so the example that you're setting in the home, because then I think about as they now grow up into and develop into young men and citizens, and if they one day have their own families, and how they interact with friends or how they interact with intimate partners, that they will carry this with them, and that it will be contagious because there will be a certain standard of interaction that they now demand
because they're worthy of it,
because they're worthy of it,
right?
And so I think it's beautiful. I think it's wonderful. Listen, we just have a few minutes left, but man, I could go on and on. I knew this, we could talk for hours. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. You and I had, kind of exchanged some messages here and there, but again, I was always locked in and paying attention. And so I know that you are doing some wonderful work. Not only in your community, but again, how you man, I have to tell you, I loved it when you did the recording of the teacher or the administrator who tried to pull the okey doke on like one of your sons or something. I'm like, this brother was like, oh, is this what you think you about to do up in here?
Not today.
Not today.
No.
Not today.
No. And I, as an administrator myself, I'm always going to the table. I always go into the table thinking about the person with the least amount of power in the room. How could this person feel in this moment? And so walking into my son's school, where a teacher, a white woman, and I think it's very, I think when we look at policing and we look at a field that's very dominated by white men, I think that education is a field that is dominated largely by white women. And so when we look at the ways that white supremacy manifests itself, it easily manifests itself in the classroom. And so to think that my 10-year-old son was put in a classroom where his teacher asked him to defend the institution of slavery as a lesson, and that he had feelings about it, and that she told him, well, you just have to do it. And like, he's trying to really out here verbally articulate and argue for why people that look like him should be enslaved. No, ma'am. No. So No, ma'am. So when I walked into that school and had all these barriers, of course, being a Black man and like,
Yeah.
you know, there's ways that, you know, I can't be too mad because they don't call the police on me, but I need to also advocate for my son. It was one of those moments when I remember recording that, and I think the moment that hit me the most was when we left and my son was crying and he just said, "Thank you."
Mm.
And I think that goes back to the seeing our kids, right? Like hearing them and seeing them and loving them deeply. And that was one of those moments.
Yeah, man. That's so beautiful. Listen, there's hearts and stuff that are going up. I'm just
I don't
going
even
to
know
read.
what's happening down here.
Listen, I'm going to read a couple of comments. Someone says, as a parent of a queer child, it's good to have someone reinforce that I'm doing pretty good by my child. So many judge me for it, and it's hard at times not to explode when they judge us. To this parent here who is saying that she feels judged by others, what would you say to her as a parent of a queer child?
Wow. First of all, I feel I'm really humbled to even be asked that question, right? I think that the best thing that you can do is provide a safe space for your baby. See them, hear them, love them deeply. And the other judgments, I think when I think about judgment, especially around gender, performance, and sexuality, it's because that when people see queer folks living their life and living their truth, we've accessed a specific part of ourselves that other people have not been able to access. And people don't know the amount of trauma that we've lived through to be able to pull that out of ourselves.
Yeah.
So when I think about this person that talks about having a kid, it's that like your job in this is to love your child, but also to help them be able to access the deepest parts of themselves that are who they are. So that when they walk into a room, they can stand flat-footed in knowing that if nobody else in this room affirms the fullness of who I am, that my mom and my dad or whoever it is love me and they see me and they accept me.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
And I would say to that parent, again, you listen, kudos to you because you raised that brave soul who has been able to live their truth. So as others judge you and as you may feel judged, understand that what is most important is that your parenting has raised an individual that has the power, has been able to access the power within. And obviously that has something to do with the environment that they've been raised in. So kudos to you. Maybe just a couple of other comments here. Black educators are so necessary. I've been hanging in there for 8 years now, singing Tumo. Thank you. Somebody else said, this convo is a real gift tonight. Someone also said, wish I had a father like you growing up. They must be talking to you because I ain't got no kids yet. Amen to that. Somebody said, this is like free therapy. Come on for free therapy, right? Beautifully said. This is Black fatherhood. This conversation is a gift and a blessing. And again, my brother, just beautiful conversation and everything else. Listen, people don't understand how important those early years are and how policing from a place of toxic masculinity can cause so much damage in a child. And I think, again, this is something that the reason why it's so important for you to combat it with that safe haven and that solace that you have created in your home. So as we wrap up, my brother, is there anything that you just kind of, as we're going into Juneteenth and, you know, we've been talking about this emancipation and owning our narrative and liberation, is there anything that you want to leave with the people, anything you got coming up, or just a parting word?
Yeah, I just want to say that no doctrine, no theology, which I know is huge when we look at race and Black folks and you know, church, but no doctrine, no paradigm, no way of thinking, no socially constructed norm, no nothing that society says, nothing that your family says is worth your liberation. None of that is worth your liberation. I think our greatest good in this earth is to find out the fullness of who we are, the intrinsic part that we know ourselves to be, to fish that out and to be that, to bloom and flourish as that person. And so the road to emancipation and freedom it's met with tears, right? It's met with sorrow, but it's also met with joy. And I think to know that at the end of all the things that you might lose on the way, you will find yourself. And when you find yourself, you will find this person who is worthy, who is powerful, and who is enough. Always, in always.
Yeah. Beautifully said, man. Listen, to all those fathers out there, including you, sir, happy early Father's Day. Again, I appreciate you. To all my Black folks out there, like, happy Juneteenth.
Yes.
And keep living your liberated lives. And I just want to thank everybody who tuned in tonight. Again, this is episode 10 of the Naked Truth Experience. And we're going to be back next week with a wonderful Pride edition called Family Pride, where I'm going to actually be uplifting same-sex families with children. So again, we're going to be continuing on just lifting up the narratives of Black folks in the full spectrum of humanity and love and just support. And I'm just so excited. I'm excited to be here and to be a part of this experience. You can find me, of course, at he_smiles. I am your essential life coach, so you can also reach me at info@monroehoward.com. Nicholas Gaines, thank you, sir, for being here tonight. And
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. And you have a wonderful, it looked like it got dark as hell over there. Like, just all
It got dark real quick. It did.
I'm like,
it's suddenly dark.
Brother, I'm leaning into the camera like I'm losing you, Nick. I'm losing you, brother.
Yeah. My melanin is no longer popping. It's now like, fizzling. But don't worry, it's there.
Yes. But love you, my brother, and I look forward to the next time we get a chance to engage.
Yes, sounds good. Thank you for having me. Thank you for this work you're doing.
Absolutely, man. My pleasure.
Wow. I am so glad that we showed that episode again. And as I was watching it back for a second time, actually, this will probably be the third time, I'm always inspired by the raw nature of Black men coming together and being vulnerable with one another. So I want to thank Nicholas. I want to thank Nick. That's my brother. I want to thank him for his willingness to share his heart and to share his story, because I know that it resonated with a lot of people, including myself. There was something that I want to pick out. Nick said this whole thing, one of his last statements was about finding yourself. And what I loved is he said, you find yourself worthy, you find yourself powerful, and you find yourself being enough. Worthy, powerful, and being enough. And those are amazing words that I hope resonates with anyone who may be struggling in any of those areas. When you see yourself, please see yourself as wonderful and worthy. Please see yourself as powerful. And please, most importantly, see yourself as more than enough. As always, I want you to please like, share, and subscribe. Join our Facebook group. And I would like you to please join us tomorrow on Instagram Live and also Facebook Live. So every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, we do our talk back, our 10-minute talk back. They've been turning into like 10, 15 minutes because the conversation's been getting so good. But it's a great opportunity for us to you share your thoughts and experiences with me about the episode. And we might even get Nick to come back on and tell us how he's been doing and give us some updates since the last time we talked. So, as I always say, thank you so much for tuning in. I want to thank my illustrious producer, Julius Jones. I couldn't do this without you. And to all of you, have a wonderful night.